Imagine if you live in a small town that's so far north that during the winter, the sun does not rise for 30 days. While this fact is indeed true in some areas of the world, imagine a group of vampires come visit and take advantage of the darkness and feed on you. This happened to these town folks who live in Burrow, Alaska, in a horror movie called 30 Days of Night. Although the movie is not completely based upon a real story, it is most certainly a very real fear for many people who actually live in the Alaskan town of Burrow. In today's video, I will be speaking to you about why I believe 30 Days of Night is actually the scariest vampire movie ever created by far. Okay guys, that's enough with that voice. I just try to make it a little bit entertaining for y'all. So, without further ado guys, let's get started. The 30 Days of Night movie was based on the comic book mini-series that was created by Stephen Niles. Stephen Niles is the man who wrote the story behind 30 Days. When Niles pitched his story to IW Publishing, his world changed right after that because they loved his work and they published his comic book idea with the help of Ben Templesmith. Templesmith is the one who did the artwork for the 3 main comic books created by both of them. There's more in the series, but the first 3 were created by them. With the success of his comic book, Stephen Niles thought of making it as a film adaptation. The person who picked up the movie was none other than Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi is the man who wrote and directed Evil Dead in 1981. He is also the man who directed the original 3 Spider-Man movies, starring Tobey Maguire as the one and only Spider-Man. With the success of the first Spider-Man movie being released on May 3rd, 2002, 30 Days of Night was picked up by Sam Raimi and Senator International in July 2002. 30 Days of Night was in great hands for sure. With October 19 approaching soon, the movie will be turning 15 years old since its initial release in theaters. As an 11-year-old kid, when I first saw this movie, I was completely surprised and scared out of my mind when I first saw this movie. Before this movie, I have seen a couple of vampire movies here and there, like Queen of the Dam, Blade 1 and 2, From Dusk Till Dawn, and The Lost Boys, but never have I ever seen a movie like 30 Days of Night. The setting overall for the movie is what sets it apart from the rest. I spoke to you briefly that the movie takes place in Burrow, Alaska, a town that is covered with snow most of the time and is usually very cold. Now, keep that in the back of your head and think about a group of vampires that come to visit the town where the sun doesn't rise for 30 days. The town of Burrow, Alaska is preparing for its annual 30 Days of Night, a period during the winter with a month-long polar night. As the town gets ready, a stranger rows ashore from a large ship and sabotages the town's communications and transport to the outside world. We got to meet the town's sheriff named Eben Olesen, played by none other than Josh Hartnett. Josh Hartnett came out in a couple of films I have seen over the years, like The Faculty and Halloween H2O. Both great movies, by the way, and so it was cool seeing him in another great horror movie. Sheriff Olesen investigates all over town so he can find out who sabotaged the communications and transport to the outside world. He came to the conclusion that the stranger who entered the town was the one behind destroying all the communications and was also the one who killed all the sled dogs. Eben Olesen's wife Stella was going to leave town by plane but didn't make it in time and missed her flight. So she had to stay in Alaska for the next 30 days, as everybody else who chose to remain in Burrow, Alaska. On that same night, a group of vampires started to attack everyone that was living there. These vampires are rabid and very fast. That's what makes them very scary. They'll keep feeding and feeding until there is not a single drop of blood left. Instead of having only 2 sharp teeth, the vampires in this movie have all their teeth razor sharp, like a shark. Imagine getting bit by one of those. Yeah, it's not fun. While this was going on, Eben, Stella, Eben's younger brother, Jake, and several other survivors took shelter in a boarded up house with a hidden attic. The stranger didn't make it as far because Marlo, who is the leader of the vampire group, found him. Apparently, the stranger who visited the town was helping the group of vampires. The stranger believed that the vampires were going to turn him into one of them as a reward for his help. Since he encountered the vampires on the ship from the beginning, he had no choice but to help them out by taking out the communications and by killing all the sled dogs so no one could escape the town. Marlo thanks him for doing what he asked and then snaps his neck. What I like about this movie is that it is a survival horror type of movie with vampires on it. Movies like Saw, Train to Busan, The Purge, and The Belko Experiment are all part of the survival horror subgenre. 30 Days of Night counts as one of them as well, because the people in the town are trying to survive against the harsh winter and the vicious vampires who are hungry for blood. While the group was hiding in the attic, Eben gave a brief speech on what they were planning to do. In the meantime, the sun came up. They had to survive for 30 days without any sunlight, and they had to ration their food carefully. Eben also said that they had two advantages that the group of vampires didn't. One was that they knew the town very well, and the second one was that they knew the code. "We live here for a reason, because nobody else can," said Eben to the small group of survivors. If they weren't familiar with the town, then they would have a very hard time finding food, and most importantly, surviving. This group of vampires are smart too. They use one of the survivors as bait so more of them could come in their direction and that they can slaughter all of them and eat them as well. One of the survivors that were hiding in the attic wanted to help the woman before the vampires could find her, but Eben noticed the tactic the vampires were using. Eben tried to help her out, but he was too late. For the woman that was yelling out for help, there was no way she was going to survive. She was dead meat. Eben saw a survivor named John Reese hiding under his porch. Eben, trying to avoid getting caught by the vampires, went over to him. Little did he know that John became one of the vampires. Earlier in the movie, John's wife was taken from him by the group of vampires. John tried to save his wife, but he failed. Eben didn't know that the townspeople could also turn into one of them. He killed John while he was stuck in the swing and felt really bad for doing it. As the sheriff of the town, it's his job to protect people and not kill them. But he had to make a very hard choice. It was either to get bitten and turn into a vampire as well, or stop John with the axe John had. John was never actually bitten though. He was actually scratched by one of the vampires. This meant that if someone got bitten or even scratched by a vampire, they would turn into one of them slowly. The same thing happened to one of the main survivors when he got scratched by a little girl that turned into a vampire. Yes, this movie had a little girl that became a vampire as well. The group of survivors were able to make it to the general store because of the blizzard that occurred around day 7. And when they made it to the store, they found a little girl feeding on one of the townspeople. I remember seeing this part and I was just completely terrified. I've never really seen a kid vampire like that. Maybe in the Little Vampire movie, but I don't really count that since it's not really a horror type of movie, you know? But yeah, this was scary at the time. While trying to take out the girl, Carter, I believe, got scratched by the little girl, and that's why he lets Eben know that he didn't want to turn into one of the vampire creatures, and so Eben killed him in the other room with the axe. The question I had for this was, why did it take so long for Carter to turn into one of the vampires? When they got to the sheriff's station, that was when he was beginning to turn. Jake, who is Eben's younger brother, killed the little girl with the axe they had in the general store. Just like Eben when he killed John, Jake didn't want to take the little girl's life, but he knew that someone had to do it or else they would have all been dead. Again, it's called surviving. The group's next stop was at the sheriff's station. To get to the station, Evan went to go use the UV lights they had close to where they were staying. It was a 50-50 chance that the lights weren't going to do any damage against the vampires, but it actually did do damage to one of them. Since the female vampire came close to Evan, the light did do her some good damage, and Evan was able to run away from the vampires, but not very far. Bo had a plan of causing a distraction so Evan could make it to the station. Bo used his tractor he had, and he tried to take out as many vampires as he could with his shotgun and vehicle. Bo used all the flares he had to blow up the vampires that were surrounding him in the building he was in. He managed to do it, but the vampires quickly got away from the burning building. Unfortunately, this was the last stop for Bo, and he didn't make it out alive. His head got stumped by the leader of the vampire group, and that was it for him. Day 27 was in effect, and the group of survivors found Billy, who was the deputy in the town. Billy signaled them with a flashlight from across the street. Evan and Stella make it to Billy's house. When the vampires had attacked, Billy killed his wife and daughters, but his gun jammed when he tried to commit suicide. His family were already turning, and Billy had to make a hard choice by killing them. Once Evan, Stella, and Billy got back to the station, they noticed that the group weren't even there anymore. The only other big place where the group could have hidden from the vampires was at the nearest utility. While hiding under a house, Stella notices a young girl walking. She was covered in blood and was scared. She was walking slowly, and Stella called out her name. She went to go get her, but it was another trap from the vampires. They used the little girl as bait so they could find them. Evan and Billy caused a distraction so the vampire will follow them. But somehow Stella and the little girl got trapped under a car and didn't make it to the utility as they were planning to. The rest of the group were at the utility, and Billy made it as well. Little did he know that he led one of the vampires to their hiding spot, and Billy got bitten by him. Evan tries to fight the vampire off as much as he could, but then Billy knocks the vampire into the heavy-duty shredder, and in doing so, grinds his own hand to a stump by accident. Billy was then killed by Evan because he was starting to turn into one of the vampires since he was bitten. Since there are a few days left before the sun comes out, on the very last day, the vampires started to burn down the town to destroy evidence of them ever being there, including any survivors. Realizing Stella is trapped and that he cannot beat the vampires in his current state, Evan turns himself into a vampire by injecting himself with Billy's infected blood. Evan thought that that was the only choice he had left. When Evan turned into a vampire, he mentioned that he could smell everyone's blood. I always wonder if the vampires could have just sensed the survivors' blood the whole time and were just toying with them the whole 30 days. Maybe because they weren't in close proximity, or was it because it was very cold and that they couldn't sense where they were the whole time? But I could be wrong though. Evan confronted Marlo, who was the leader of the pack, and they got in a very vicious fight. Evan killed Marlo by having a hole punched through his mouth and head. The vampires could have killed Evan as well, but they started to flee away from the town as far as they could. What if it was still nighttime? Would they have still fled away because their leader got killed? Or were they going to stand and fight Evan? I always wonder what could have happened. Knowing he will die soon, Evan and Stella go off to watch the sunrise together, sharing one last kiss. As the sun comes up, Evan's body burns to ash in Stella's arms, and that's when the credits began and this movie was done. I truly enjoyed this movie. This movie was very scary when I saw it the first time, and I definitely do put it as the best vampire movie I've seen by far. Just the atmosphere and the cinematography used in this movie makes it a very worthy movie to watch if you want to get scared. It's definitely not for the faint of heart because there is a lot of blood in this movie and it might just pull people away from it because of the horror and violence in it. 30 Days of Night was released in 2007 and to this day it still holds up with today's movies. I will consider this movie as a horror classic. It's definitely not talked about much when it comes to horror movies. Hopefully with this video I share with you today, it makes you want to give it a watch. Well guys, that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this video and want similar videos like these, I have created an in-depth horror video playlist of me explaining anything horror related. Every topic that has to do with horror goes on this playlist. I have been doing it for a couple of years now, so probably you might find a video you might actually like. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. And make sure before you go, give this video a big thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel for more videos. As always guys, live to the fullest.